Welcome to lab 3 of Learn Angular in 8 hours, and in this lab we will talk about two important concepts, factory and services. Now factory and services are the most important part of Angular. They are most interesting part of Angular, but at the same time they are very confusing because both of them seem to be very close to each other, right? So both of them look very similar, but they are meant to be used in different situations. So that's why I'm trying to take both of these concepts in the same lecture so that I can make you understand the difference. So at this moment our application is running. So basically, if you remember, this was the state of our application. We had customer name, we had customer code, we had a date field and all that, right? So application is good, but one of the big problem with this application is the way the code is organized. If you see at this moment, our code is very tightly coupled. What do I mean by that? When we say we are using Angular, we use Angular for binding, right? And if you look at the overall architecture of Angular, we have three pieces into it. One is we have HTML, right? So we have the HTML UI, right? Second is we have the model, that is customer name, customer code and customer amount, right? And the third one is the binding code. The binding code which will bind these properties with the UI. So that means at this moment that is replaced by Angular, right? So Angular is that whatever code, the binding code, that gel code, which actually helps us to bind these properties with the UI. But if you see at this moment, the view is separate. It's a separate HTML chunk. But look at the model and the binding code. They are all into one customer function, right? They are tightly coupled, isn't it? The dollar scope is completely mixed up with the customer name and customer code properties. So our model is very tightly coupled with Angular. Let us say tomorrow, for some reason you want to use Knockout. Knockout is again one more framework like Angular, which is very famous, used for doing such kind of a binding. So let us say tomorrow if you want to use Knockout, then to replace this Angular code would be very difficult. If you see prior to Angular, that means in 2006, 7 and 8, Knockout was a very famous framework. Knockout was used to bind the JavaScript models with the UI, right? It was a very simple and a nice framework. Today also people use it in a lot of projects. Later on in 2009, Angular came up and it swept the complete market. People started loving it. Now think about those people who have created their project in Knockout and they want to start using Angular. So if they have not created a decoupled architecture like this, where their models are separate, their binding code is separate and their UI is separate, it would be very difficult for them to migrate to Angular. And also let us think forward. Today it is Angular, tomorrow it can be something else, because these open source projects are really good, they are cool, they are free, right? But at the same time they are very volatile as well, right? So we need to somehow decouple the model from the binding framework, that is from Angular. So let us go ahead and start thinking around those lines, that how do we decouple these models, these properties from these Angular code like dollar scope and whatever we are writing here. So first thing, let us start working back. Let us go and create pure JavaScript class. Let us go and create a pure JavaScript model which has no Angular code attached to it. So what we will do is we will move all of these properties, customer code, customer name, sales date and time, all of these properties. Let us go ahead and move it into a pure JavaScript class, JavaScript function called as customer. So I'm going to go and move all of these properties here. So I'll say here this dot customer name is equal to Shiv. This dot customer code is equal to 1001. This dot customer amount is equal to 100, right? So what I'm doing here is now I'm trying to move out all of these properties to a pure JavaScript class, right? Also let us move the sales date as well, sales date time, right? So this also I'm going to go and move here, copy this. So I'm moving all the code to a pure JavaScript class. So this is our pure JavaScript model. For now, we will just keep the customer amount color property here. We'll discuss about this property later on. So there are some code still in the binding function of Angular, right? We will talk about how to move those code as well. But at this moment, on a hindsight, I have a pure customer class with properties, and normally, when you say this is a model, right, it will also have some kind of some functions like validate, calculate or something, right? So it can have business logic and functions as well, right? So what I will do is let me go and create a simple function here called as calculate discount. So this is my business logic. So this discount calculation, this function actually helps to calculate discount. So for at this moment, let me just return a discount of 10, right? So we'll talk about this, what exactly I have written here. The point here is that I have a class with 4 properties and 1 method. Okay. So now if this is the customer class, then what should this class be termed as? So this cannot be the customer class now, right? So I'll say that this is my binding code. Now that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, isn't it? This is my model. This is my binding code, and below is my UI. So you can see now my UI is here, view. My model is this pure JavaScript class. Tomorrow I can take this and attach it with knockout if I wish. And here is my Angular code. But now the next question which comes is, how does this binding code access this customer class? We need to create an object and get inside it, right? So for that, we're going to go and say create a customer object of this function or this instance. You can see here. So I'm saying here inside the binding code class, the Angular binding code function, I have created a customer variable which is inside this $scope, and he is creating an instance of this class and putting it here. Now you can see that I have not put the customer amount color in the customer, because what I feel is personally, this is a model. A model should not have UI kind of activities like coloring, enabling, disabling. So that's why I have kept this thing in the binding code at this moment. But I will leave it to you as architecture decision. If you really want to push it here, it is absolutely okay, because sometimes this is not a pure model. Sometimes this is a view model, a model which can also have UI values, right? UI properties like color, enable, disable, etc. So that I will leave it to you. But at this moment, my thinking is that this is my pure model, and these extra properties like customer amount color here, submit, which is actually going to send this thing to the server, are actually related to the binding code. So the way I have organized this, it is my pure model which has only business logic, and this is my binding code which binds with the UI. So anything related to UI, those properties I have kept here. But feel free, as I've said, that a lot of people create this class as a view model class. If that is the case, you can happily move this property over here. Okay, fine. So here you can see now I've created a customer object and it is all set. But now henceforth, we can't refer the name as customer amount. We have to say $scope.customer amount. Okay, customer color is at the scope level. This is fine. $scope.customer name. So henceforth, all the properties now, we can't just say customer name and customer code. You have to qualify with the object. So all these things we need to now change to customer dot. Okay, remember the customer amount color is in the binding code. So for that, we don't have to do any kind of, we don't have to put any kind of qualifier. But for the other things, we have to put the customer dot, right? Okay, again over here as well, customer dot. So this is one big change which you need to do here. And it makes sense, basically you are now tying up with the binding code, and the binding code has the model inside it, right? And now this controller here is not customer, it is actually the binding code, isn't it? So we need to actually go and create the object of binding code, and the controller now is binding code. Look at this. There is a binding code, and inside the binding code we have the model which is customer. So there is a binding code, and inside that we have model which is called a supplier. So this architecture makes more sense, right? So let us go and just run this application. We have changed nothing from the functionality point of view. We have just organized our project internally, right? So this should work as it is. So let me just go and do a Control F5. Let us see if it is running. Yes, you can see. This is not changing the color. What happened? Let us see if this is changing. Yeah, this is changing. This is changing, but that color is not changing, right? Remember, we had that yellow color and something. So let us see here. Customer amount. So customer amount and customer amount color, right? Oh, you can see here again in the dollar watch, we cannot just say customer amount. We have to say customer amount. So small errors, but it is good to see that, to remove these errors right away here, and you can also see it. Good. So the code is working as it is, but internally, if you see at this moment, the project is really organized into 3 sections actually. So this is our view, HTML, right? This is our view. This is our model, customer, and this is our binding code, that whatever code, right? So now, all of these 3 sections are different. And also the way this is logically separated, I would like to also go and do some physical separation. What I can also do is I can go and move this complete customer class into a customer.js file, right? So I can just go and add a new JavaScript file here, and let us name it customer.js file. So we can just go and put all the customer code here. And then here I can just drag and drop. So I can go here and say, drag and drop this. So, if you see now, this approach is pretty nice, right? So you have a UI, you do a add reference, which is nothing but a drag and drop. So you say, okay, now what in this UI, what do you want to bind? I want to bind customer. So drag and drop customer.js, put your binding code, tag, and you are done, right? So try to organize your project into these kind of 3 logical units, or I will say physical units, and make your project much better. So this is really nice, that our project is now divided into 3 logical sections, and we can see them physically, and also we can visually see them. But still there is a lot of room for improvement. Look at this binding code. If you look at this binding code at this moment is tightly coupled with the customer object. Over here I am saying new customer, right? This is tightly coupled. Tomorrow I cannot use this binding code with supplier. Tomorrow I cannot use this binding code with accounts. I would like to come to a situation where I would like to say this binding code can bind any object. This would be my dream, right? To say that this binding code can consume any kind of object, right? So is it possible? So first thing, yes, it is possible. Angular has something called as services and factory for that. But before we go towards those 2 principles, let us first understand the basic problem why this is tightly coupled. This binding code at this moment is tightly coupled because he is getting into the object creation activity. This binding code, what is this binding code supposed to do? The binding code is supposed to create the scope object. The binding code is supposed to do the bindings, 2-way bindings, 1-way binding, right? But now this binding code is now thinking, should I create a customer object or should I create a supplier object? So that's why, because of this new keyword, this binding code is coupled with this customer.js. So in other words, we need to go and invert this object creation process from the binding code to someone else. Again, I repeat, we need to invert this work. We need to give away, we need to delegate this object creation process to some other entity. In other words, we have to do something called as inversion of control, IOC. IOC is a principle where we say that one part of the code actually says that he will not do that activity because it does not belong to him. For example, at this moment, the binding code says that I am not responsible for creating the objects. I am responsible for creating the scope objects. I am responsible for doing bindings. So this work should go to someone else. and someone should give me the object. So I can say here, please someone give me this any object. Look at this. He says that I'm not going to go and do this new keyword, because the time I do the new keyword, I'm tightly coupled to the customer class, right? So he says that, can someone pass me this object, and then I can do the bindings. So in simple words, somebody from Angular has to come in and give the object over here. Again, let me repeat this sentence. Somebody from Angular has to come in and give the object here. Now let me replace that give word with the word inject, right? So that's more professional, isn't it? Give, put, that word does not look good. So somebody has to come from Angular and inject this object over here. And this object is a dependency object, right? So this binding code is dependent on customer and customer color. So this customer object over here is a dependency, isn't it? So in other words, somebody has to come here and do dependency injection. Dependency injection, right? So to do that, we have something called as services in Angular. Remember, inversion of control is the principle. It's a principle where you said that I will not write the new keyword, but then somebody has to give the object at the end of the day, right? That is done by using dependency injection. So inversion of control is a principle, and dependency injection actually implements inversion of control. Okay. So to do dependency injection, I need to go here and say my app.services. So my app.service, right? I will say that now what is the parameter? Parameter is any object. So I'll say that in this any object, please go and inject customer. And tomorrow you can see in this any object, please go and inject supplier, right? So customer. So you can see now, this binding code has no reference of the, of the customer object explicitly, right? So if I run this, it will work. So you can see that it is working. Everything is working as it is, right? So these are termed as services. Whatever you see over here in this Angular, right, in the Angular binding code, in the parameters, are nothing but services. They are services which are injected on runtime by Angular. In case you want to know more about dependency injection and inversion of control, I would suggest you to go through the design pattern section, where we have explained what is DI, what is IOC, and how they are different. Okay, but remember that Angular completely depends on dependency injection. Look at this. This $scope here is actually dependency injected. In the binding code, I never knew that what kind of scope I'm creating. Means the time I put here ng controller, he goes and he creates a div scope. If I put the ng controller on the body, he will go and create a body scope, right? So if you can see here, this scope object again is completely decoupled. I don't know how it is working, how Angular is injecting. It is all happening on runtime. So whenever you see this $, right, if you see any kind of parameter inside Angular with $scope, $HTTP, these are ready-made services given by Angular. And the one without the $, like one which we did now, is nothing but your own customized service object. For example, at this moment, I have customer class as my service, right? So you can see that the complete Angular framework works on dependency injection, and dependency injection. And remember that dependency injection is the core if you want to decouple two systems. The time you have a new keyword between two systems, they become tightly coupled. So remember, to do dependency injection, you have to give the parameter name. So you can see that this is any object. So you have to go and say here my app.service. So the first one is the parameter and second one is the class, of which instance you want to inject, right? Great. Now, when we talk about applications, basically we have two kinds of logics. One is we have the business logic, like domain objects like customer, supplier, accounts, addresses, phones, right? Second is we have infrastructure logic classes like utility classes like logger, error handling, right? Database calls. So we have technical classes and we have domain objects, that means the real world object like customer, supplier, what you actually see in your business, right? So one is, yes, you can have such kind of a class. Second is, you can also have utility classes, right? So let me go and create a utility class here. So I'm going to go and create a utility class. So let us say this is my utility class. So this utility class is a general purpose class. In this class, I will do some I will have some common code for checking. I will have some common thing like versioning, right? So let me go and create a class here which is having some common technical code. We call this kind of classes as infrastructure classes, right? So there is a domain class and one is an infrastructure class. So now let us say we have a very simple utility class here, and this utility class has couple of functions, couple of constants. For example, it has the application name, it has application version, it has a get date function which actually returns the current date. There is a isEmpty function, wherein you can pass the value and he will check, he will let you know that this is empty or not. So if the value is equal to 0, then this is empty, right? Or else this is false. So basically we have some couple of technical functions or common code, utility code, which I have put over here, right? So two functions here which is doing the get date and isEmpty and some couple of constants. So you can see normally we have such kind of two kinds of classes, right? Or two kinds of code actually. One is the utility classes code and the other one is such kind of domain objects, right? So I also want to use this utility class in my UI here because you can see that some of the common things which I'm doing here is, for example, over here I am setting the date, right? So I can use it from the utility class. You can see that I'm doing some checks of the length, right? So rather than doing it again and again, I can use the isEmpty function of the utility class. So in other words, I would like to also use now the utility class in my program. So I'm going to go and drag and drop the utility class as a reference. So I'm going to go and drag and drop the utility class as a reference in my UI. So now again, as a best practice, let us go and inject the utility object over here. So I will say a $scope. So you can see that I'm injecting the utility object. So quickly $scope dot utility. Oh, my mouse. Utility is equal to utility object, which is coming from the top, right? And also, because this is dependency injected, don't forget you have to go and make a service entry as well. So we will say that please inject in this utility object variable, please inject the utility class, right? So basically you can see even the dependency injection is done. So now I can happily go and start using the functions of the utility. So for example, I would like to display the application name and version number somewhere. So somewhere on the screen here, I will say that welcome to, so basically I can say somewhere here, right? Welcome to application. So this application name, right? Yeah, so utility dot application name and the current version is again application version. So you can see this common code, I am utilizing it everywhere, is this application version, right? Right, and also this utility class also has some couple of functions over here. You can see, like for example, isEmpty. So let me you can see that I'm doing this check over here. So rather than doing the check now myself, I can just go and start using the utility class, right? I can say that $scope dot utility dot is valid, right? So is the customer name, right? So is the customer name, if the customer name is empty, I'm sorry, not valid. If the customer name is empty, right, then this data is not proper. or else the data is proper, right? So again, you can see that I'm using the utility object everywhere, right? So we have utility object in our screen and we have domain object, that is the customer, right? Great. So let us go and run this. Let us first test if this is all working. So I'm going to go and do a control F5. So you can see that our application is running, and it is running again as it was running previously. Colors are changing, right? You can see the application name here. You can see the version number. Also, if you remember, we had that utility class we were using now. So again, that is working properly. So when I put a proper data, it gives me proper data. When I don't put a proper data, it does not give me proper data. So all things are working as it is, but the code is very much organized internally. At this moment, if you see, our code is broken down into 3 logical pieces. So we have model, we have the view, we have that binding code. They are all separate. And again, models are of 2 kinds. One is the model, which is the domain objects, and the other one is a very general purpose of classes like utility classes and infrastructure classes. But now there is one big problem here. So all things are working. Our service is doing the dependency injection for us. It will help us to build a very flexible system. But now let me go and do something. Let me go and copy this div tag, right, and paste it here. So in other words, what I've done now, I'm going to go and create 2 instances of my binding code, right? So I'm going to go and create 2 instances of my binding code, right? So in other words, we're going to have 2 similar UI, right? And because if you remember, as we said in the first video, if there are 2 ng controllers, then we expect 2 different instances to be running on the same screen, right? So you can see that I've copy pasted I've copy pasted the div tag again, and I have 2 ng controllers in my code. So if I have 2 ng controllers, that means I'm going to have 2 instances running, 2 different instances running, and both of these instances have no connection with each other, right? So let us go and do a control F5. Let us see that is it working as it is or not. So control F5, and there it is. If you see now, if I go and change here, watch this. If I go and change here, what is happening? Look at it. If I go and change, in other words, now we have a global instance that is injected. So in other words, at this moment, because the objects are created by this service, they are injecting global instances. ng controller is not creating instances now. It is created by the service, isn't it? Because we said that service, you need to now go and create the object. And what has he done? He has created global instances. Now the global object is good for the utility class, because a utility class will be shared, right? It's a shared class, it's an infrastructure class. So having a global object for utility class makes a lot of sense, but a global object for business objects, does not make sense, because here this screen logically is different from this screen, isn't it? So definitely the domain objects, that is customer and supplier, I would love to see them with different instances, right? And also one more point which I would like to stress here. Look at the name. This is service. Okay, service classes. Service means what? Service means normally something common, which we give to people, right? For example, a car service or hotel services, right? These things don't change from time to time or from people to people. You have it common, right? So that's why when you go and say that you want to create a service object, Angular by default goes and creates a global instance and injects it. But now in this case, I do not want a global instance. For a customer, I want different instances to be created. For that, we have to use something called as factory. Now look at this word factory. What is the English dictionary meaning of factory? English dictionary meaning of factory is nothing but a place where you create something, where you build something, isn't it? So customer is the actual thing which we want to build, right? So we need to go and create one more function here called as factory. Okay, and this person factory is responsible to create this customer object. So you can see here, I can have a factory from where I can go and create customer, create supplier, create address and whatnot, right? So at this moment you can see that I have a factory, and in that factory I have a create customer function, and he will actually go and create a new customer object. Look at this. So basically when you say a factory, when you say my app.factory, it says that I'm not going to go and create an instance now, but this factory will go and create an instance, right? So what I will do here, I will say this is not an object actually, this is a factory, right? So here I will say now this factory is responsible. So factory dot create customer. Look at this, factory dot create customer. Very important. If you see here, when I'm passing the utility object, I'm straightforward setting the reference. But when I'm passing the factory, I'm calling the method of the factory to create the object. So remember that in case of factory, the factory is responsible to create the object, while in case of service, a global instance is created and injected. In case of factory, instances are not injected. In case when you say my app.factory, he actually injects a reference, I will say, or he actually creates a delegate, must be, that is the right word in case you are from C# world. So he actually goes and he passes a delegate, and by using that delegate, now we are now creating the customer object. So remember that you have to go and create a factory, and this factory is responsible to create this customer. So now if I go and run this, let us see what happens. So we expect that different instance of customer to be running. Oh, there is a problem. F12, what is it? Exceptions are everywhere. Factory binding code, what is that? Factory, let us see. Factory provider, factory. This is factory dot create customer. What is the error? Unknown provider, factory provider. It is good that we are getting these errors. Unknown provider, factory provider. Oh, you can see here I named this parameter as factory. So here also I have to say factory, isn't it? Okay, good. We are getting these errors, and also I'm resolving them. It is better not to hide errors, rather it is good to see them, right? So you can see now when I change here, he is not changing in this instance. When I change here, he is not changing this instance. So basically you can see now both of these instances are different. So remember, in case of factory, instances are not injected. The creation of instance is delegated to the factory. So here delegate is injected, right? In case of service, a global instance is injected. This factory over here you can resemble with factory design pattern. This service over here you can resemble with singleton design pattern. Both of these things over here are nothing but their implementation of design pattern. If you look at Angular, it is using all the best practices of design pattern everywhere. Dependency injection, inversion of control, singleton pattern, factory pattern. So this is nothing but it is factory pattern, and this is nothing but it is singleton pattern. In case you are new to design pattern, I would suggest you to go and walk through the videos of design pattern section, where we have explained factory pattern, design pattern, where we have created a project of design pattern and explained. So I would suggest you to go through those videos. But this is nothing but the factory pattern. This is nothing but singleton pattern. So here a global instance is injected. Here a method delegate is sent, and then that delegate is responsible to create the object. Now the importance of factory cannot be understood with such a simple example, because one of the things which can come to your mind is that that why is this factory special class needed over here? Can't Angular guys just say that, okay, if this is factory, then create a new instance, right? Why did they say that you create a separate class for creating the object? Now let me go and complicate this situation. Let us say you have different kinds of customer classes. So for example, now this customer class here is doing a calculate discount, and it returns a 10% discount. Now let us say we have one more class of customer here called as gold customer. So I'll say, okay, there is a customer gold here, and this gold customer behavior returns 20% discount. Okay. Now remember that in JavaScript we do not have inheritance. We have something called as prototypical inheritance. So we can use that, and we could have inherited this customer gold from customer. So we can see that later on, right? At this moment, what I'm doing is I've just copy pasted it, but you can use prototypical inheritance and you can avoid these duplicate property over here, what I've written, right? So we'll see that later on. But for now, you can see that I have two different kinds of customer classes. One is they have the same property. So they have customer name, they have customer code, they have customer amount. But the discount calculation logic is different. So one does the 10% calculation and the other does the 20% calculation. So now what you can do in the factory is you can say that, okay, create customer, what type of customer you want. So if you say here, if type is 1, so let us say if type is equal to 1, that's what it is, factory pattern, right? Then please return our normal customer. So please return the normal customer class, or else return customer gold, right? And now what we can do here is, in this I can say that, okay, so if I pass here 1, look at this. This is where things starts becoming more flexible, right? You can see here. So if I pass create customer 1, right, it will actually give me a normal customer. If I pass him here 2, it will give me gold customer. And tomorrow when new customer types are added, I don't have to do anything. I have to just change this 1, 2, 3, or must be these values can come from some config file. It can come from some drop down, right? So the whole goal of this factory over here is, that tomorrow when new types are added at the backend, I don't have to go and change my UI. I don't have to go and change my Angular code. I have to just go and put one more if condition here, and the new type is reflected all over my application. So let us go and quickly check this. So what I'm going to do is over here, let me just create a method. If you see at this moment, this discount calculation is in this function over here, right? So let me go here and let me do like this. Let me just go and display this in alert at this moment. Okay, at this moment I will put an alert. Remember that it is not a good idea to put alert in business objects, right? They should return the value and then the UI code should be in the HTML. But at this moment, just quickly to just see that this is really working or not, what I will do is let me go and put alert over here. So this returns a 10% discount and this returns a 20% discount. And let us go and call this calculate discount method in a button click. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and create a button here, right? And I will say ng click. And remember that this method calculate discount belongs to the customer. It belongs to the customer, right? So over here we have to say customer dot calculate discount, right? And I will say this is discount. Okay, great. So you can see now at this moment I'm passing 1. So that means I should see. So let us see, I should see a 10% discount. So let me do a control F5. So if I say discount, you can see it is 10, right? Now if I go and change this to 2, look at this, flexible, right? I am seeing 20% discount. So the whole goal of factory pattern is that this factory over here says that I will take the object creation activity and the UI code and Angular code. You don't worry about what kind of customer is at the back end. I can have a gold customer, I can have a silver customer, I can have different kind of discount calculation. You just call me and I will give you the necessary instance type. So my binding code here now does not have to worry about new customer or new customer gold or new customer silver. It just passes 1, 2, 3, some kind of a value, and then depending on that value, the object is passed back. So remember that factory pattern is all about decoupling. Dependency injection, inversion of control. The main goal of dependency injection, inversion of control, factory pattern is that to ensure that when changes happen in one part of the application, it does not reflect all over. What is a good software? A good software is that software where when I make changes in one place, I don't have to change at 10 places. So for example, over here also, when I go and add a new customer class, I don't have to go and change here, here, and here, right? So this app.factory, my app.factory here is nothing but it is the implementation of factory pattern. Now, again, one of the things, which you can see in this customer classes at this moment, this, you can see this date and time we are taking from this toDate string. And in the utility class also, we have this getDate function, right? So how do we go and pass this utility class over here to this customer here, right? So how can we do that? Okay, again, already, the dependency injection of the utility object is happening here. So from here, you will pass this object to the customer, and from customer, it will actually get injected over here. So you have to take this object, what you have here, which you are getting from Angular, pass it to the factory, and then the factory will pass it to the customer. So I can also go and say something like this. I can say utility, right? So I don't have to utility.getDate. So I can say here utility.getDate, right? So I don't have to really get into how the date is getting calculated, right? So utility. But now the factory also needs this utility, isn't it? So we have to inject from Angular to the factory, and the factory injects it to the model. Look at the cascading thing, how I'm doing. So I can say now factory dot comma, and then I have to say here utility object. Utility object. This utility object is already ready-made coming from the Angular. So you can see this utility object goes to the factory, and the factory takes that and injects it to the customer, right? So again, this code should work as it is. Nothing should change here. You can see the date and time is working. Everything is working, right? But all that common code, the infrastructure code, is coming from this utility over here. And remember, as I've said, that when you're doing Angular, follow best practices. Do not put unnecessary expressions. So I'm going to go and delete this double div tag. Expressions which do not change, which are one time use colon, right? Remember, one time binding. So you can see this for the utility application name and for the utility application version. You can see that I have just put one time, right? Because I don't expect that application name and application version is going to change on the UI, right? Right, so that brings us to the end of this video. So in this video, primarily we discussed two important topics. One is services, the other one is factory. So let us quickly revise when should we use what. So first thing is, services actually inject global instance of our object. So they should be used for utility classes, for infrastructure classes, for technical classes. While in case of factory, we pass a method reference. So in case of factory, we pass a method reference, and that method reference later on calls the other method to create the object. So we should use factory in two scenarios. One is when you're using a domain object like customer supplier, and second, when you have a lot of changes at the back end. For example, in this case, I'm anticipating that today I have two types of customer. Tomorrow I can have more, right? So I don't want my other part of the code to change when I add a new customer type here. So in case you want to decouple two systems from each other, that's where again you can go and use factory. So remember, factory is for decoupling, while the service is for singleton pattern or global data, right? So remember these two differences, and henceforth, when you're creating Angular application, use both of them in a proper way and make your application better. So that brings us to the end of this video. Now the next video is on interacting with the server side. So till now we are doing everything on the client side. Angular is great. We have created factories, we have created services, we have created our classes, business logic. But everything is dead until you don't go and take this and put it on the server, until you don't go and save this into database, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go and create our server side using web API, using MVC web API. Okay, now remember that this is an Angular class, so this complete 8 hours is dedicated to Angular, but we still need some server side interaction. So I'm going to go and cover web API in the next lab. But in case you are really interested to go and see the complete MVC server side, then I would suggest you to go and watch our Learn MVC in 16-hour video series, where we have explained the server side in more detail. So remember that here in this lecture, the emphasis will be on Angular and not on server side. But we need still that 10% server side. So yes, we will cover that. But my goal here is to not teach you server side programming. My goal here is to teach you Angular programming. So for server side, I would suggest you to go and watch the Learn MVC in 16-hour series. Great. So the next video is on interacting Angular UI with server side. Thank you so much.